All right, let's do this. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Asian America to Palestine, a teaching on Zionism, Empire, and Hindutva. Thank you for joining this event brought to you by our team at 18 Million Rising, co-sponsored by ASATA, the Alliance of South Asians Taking Action, Asians for Palestine, New York City, and Hindus for Human Rights. As we get started, please feel free to share in the chat where you're joining from, and if you're part of any organization you want to shout out. We have live captioning today, as well as ASL interpretation by Jenny Blake, Liang Niu, and Desiree Carolyn. Please reach out to our interpreters directly if you have needs or questions. A little about us. 18 Million Rising connects the power of Asian America to digital organizing. We mobilize our communities through grassroots campaigns, culture shifting work, and education. We're here to dismantle systems of oppression, fight white supremacy, and work towards a liberated future. My name is Turner. I'm the Community Engagement Manager at 18MR, and I'm on Ohlone territory, also known as Berkeley, California. We will be recording this event and we'll email it out afterward. Our event today will be approximately 1.5 hours long and will feature 3 mini teach-ins from our speakers. And then we'll have time for a little conversation and end with a Q&A. You're welcome to use the Q&A feature to submit a question. We have left the chat open, as you can see, so you can connect with one another, share reactions, and share info. Please be kind and principled in the chat, and we'll be monitoring for trolls and harmful comments. As a reminder, we will be discussing sensitive topics, such as the horror in Gaza, the ongoing genocide, and far-right movements. So please take care of yourself and take a break if you need to. You can always come back and watch the recording. Because we're online and joining from all over, let's consider the legacy of colonization embedded within the technologies, structures, and ways of thinking we use every day. We, right now, are using equipment and high-speed internet that's not available in many indigenous communities, including right now in Gaza. Even the tech that is central to our work, it leaves significant carbon footprints that impacts climate change, that disproportionately affects indigenous peoples worldwide. We invite you to join us in acknowledging this, as well as our shared responsibility to do something about it, to consider our roles in decolonization and solidarity. So before we get going, I want to say that we cannot possibly cover everything that we want to in this teach-in. We are going to hear from 3 people and orgs that are doing this work, but our movement is so vast, and we know many people, here today are doing this work too in your own ways. And, we want to hear from you in the chat about, where and how you're resisting so that we can support you and lift it up. So we're here because of Zionism, because of Zionism and our movement to free Palestine. Zionism is a nationalist political ideology that called for the creation of a Jewish state by any means necessary. And it now supports the continued existence of Israel as that state. It's relied on stealing and colonizing Palestinian land and on ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from that land. And Zionism is a political movement embedded in our own Asian American communities. It influences our institutions, our workplaces, our tech platforms that we use, and our politicians. These are just in this web, just a few of the places that we see Zionism coming up, but you're welcome to name some of those other places in the chat to expand on this web too. I love this Korean granny. We're just a few days out from Biden dropping his presidential campaign, and there's this huge move for people to embrace Kamala Harris as the Democratic nominee. We are a C3 nonprofit. We're not here to endorse or reject, any candidates, but we do know that, whoever is elected, we are going to show up as a movement to hold them accountable for US imperialism, for genocide, no matter their race, their gender, whoever it is. We also know that Zionism is much deeper than whoever is in the White House. And at the same time, just as these ties to Asian America seem endless, we also are uplifted by the massive wave of Asian Americans that are rising up. They're learning about Palestine and they're resisting Zionism in order to save lives and liberate all of us in the process. We are also here today because we know that Palestine is in Asia, and we claim Palestinians as our West Asian siblings. Not long ago, Asian Americans were called Orientals, a term that we rejected, partially because of this guy here. Edward Said's book, Orientalism, taught us that the Oriental is a racist, othering fantasy. It's created by the West to oppress us. For Asian Americans, this idea of Orientalism became foundational. It shows up in our ethnic studies, our literature, our activism, and we have Edward Said, a Palestinian, to thank for that. We encourage you to look to your own heritage and countries of origin to see connections in history to the fight for a free Palestine. There are lots of places where these connections exist, for better or worse. And in this way, we see ourselves as part of a long arc of Asian resistance that has taken many forms through time, from Philly to the Philippines to Palestine. So with that, I'm going to move to our speakers. We have some awesome people joining us, and I'm so excited to hear from them about their work. So we'll hear from Karamvir Bhatti from Asians for Palestine, New York City. As a member of Asians for Palestine, Karamvir works to draw connections between the Palestinian genocide and Asian cultures, advocating that liberation for Palestine signifies freedom for all. Through actions and mutual aid, the collective raises awareness about ongoing issues, including the role of officials like Grace Meng in perpetuating violence against Palestinians. Asians for Palestine, New York City, mobilizes to inform communities and oppose harmful initiatives such as Cop City, leveraging collective knowledge to raise awareness and resist actions threatening our community's well-being. We're also joined by Nikhil Arur from Hindus for Human Rights. Nikhil's work began as a youth empowerment program manager working with students in Colorado, California, DC, as well as New York City. His transition to HFHR represents a merging of his interests and experiences in local organizing spaces around the country, and a deep desire to engage in culturally sustaining work within the Desi diaspora while simultaneously holding it accountable for the collective liberation of all marginalized communities. And we're hearing from our very own Sharmin Hossain of 18 Amar. Sharmin is a Bangladeshi American queer Muslim project manager, design strategist, and artist, and our organizing director from Queens, New York. Sharmin was the campaign director of Liberate Abortion, managing the coalition of more than 150 reproductive justice and rights orgs, groups, and abortion providers fighting for abortion access. In her former work as the political director at Equality Labs, she led the South Asian Progressive Power Building Program by using community research, cultural and political organizing, popular education, and digital security to fight the oppressions of caste apartheid, Islamophobia, white supremacy, and religious intolerance. So now I'm going to pass it to Nikhil for our first segment of the teach-in. And we're just going to pull up those slides right now.
Hey, can people hear me? I just want to make sure. I'm on my phone, so can I get do I sound okay to folks? Okay, sweet. Everyone, my name is Nikhil. Pronouns are he, him. I'm a New York City-based advocacy organizer here with Hindus for Human Rights, which is a relatively new role for me, about 3 months in. And just gonna do a very high level, as Turner mentioned, these are very, very decades long ideologies and phenomena that we're trying to talk about today. And I know there's a ton of knowledge in this virtual room already about these subjects. So I'm really excited for the discussion as well, because I think it'll be really fruitful. But just want to name again that this is meant to be a really high level overview of these of what is Hindutva. Its similarities, not only similarities with, but also its conversation with Zionism, and also sort of how it's manifesting here in the States. So I guess at its core, right, Hindutva is a Hindu supremacist ideology. It's unapologetic about that. It makes no effort to hide it. And there's tons of literature by Hindutva proponents, and lots of different things you could tackle. But at its core, these three main tenets are always true, right? Hindutva aims to homogenize Hinduism as a singular cultural, ethnic, and political identity. It also posits that Hindus are the only indigenous folk to India, right? And this concept of Hindu indigeneity is really important as we move forward in time. And the third sort of tenet is that proponents of Hindutva aim to form what is called a Hindu Rashtra, which is basically a Hindu ethno-nationalist state that stretches across the entire Indian subcontinent. So not only what is modern day India, but Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh as well. So its first sort of articulation was by V.D. Savarkar in early 20th century. I think I want to say it's 1922. And I think what's important to note is that he articulated this in a publication while he was imprisoned for being implicated in the murder of a British official during colonization. So his kind of radicalization came about under British imperialism, under explicit colonization. And I think this is really important again because it feeds into this idea of Hindutva as an ideological platform, as a decolonial movement, right? Even though we know that to be like categorically untrue in the violence it perpetuates, I think this framing is really important. And since 1922, moving into like the start of World War II is incredibly heavily influenced by the Italian fascism of Mussolini, and of course by German Nazism as well. And again, unapologetically, unabashedly positions themselves, Hindus, right, as the top of this sort of social stratification pyramid, and again, explicitly hateful towards everyone else, right? And within positioning Hindus at the top of this mythological society, right, it also aims to reinforce this idea of caste supremacy that has existed within South Asia for thousands of years, but essentially, for folks who are unfamiliar, there is a system of social stratification within South Asia, organized by caste, right? And at the quote unquote top of this caste hierarchy are Brahmins, right? So the goal of Hindutva is to not only homogenize this Hindu identity, right, but to shape it, or to form it in the shape of Brahmin identity, right? I think that's explicit. That's really important as well. And in doing so, the goal is also to invisibilize, marginalize, fundamentally erase, right, the ideas, the traditions, and the practices of not only the caste oppressed, but also indigenous Adivastis, and any folks who are sort of outside of this caste supremacist ideology, right? And in terms of how Hindutva really takes shape and how it sort of has tentacles in sort of every aspect of sort of life in India, we have to look at the RSS as its primary political vehicle. So the RSS has vast sort of diffused network of different organizations engaged in education work, paramilitary work, its network of mandirs, right, which are Hindu temples. And as a part of it, right, is the BJP. So the BJP is a political party in India, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi is at the head of this party, right? I'm seeing some great things in the chat that I'm trying not to get distracted by right now. So with that sort of framing, sort of moving into what is this relationship, right? We're here because we're concerned about Zionism, but what is this relationship between Hindutva and Zionism? So in terms of how they see themselves and how they frame themselves, right? They're both reliant, again, explicitly, unapologetically, they're both reliant on the idea of an exclusionary religious ethno-state, right? And they hearken upon these like old times, the good old days, right? Of when everything was great for their, quote unquote marginalized folks, right? And they also call explicitly for militarized settler colonialism, right? We're seeing that quite evidently in the current ongoing genocide in Gaza, but this has obviously been true in occupied Palestine since Israel came into existence, right? We're also seeing it since more or less since the formation of modern India, which actually happened at the more or less the exact same time as Israel, right? It's very evident in India's treatment of occupied Kashmir, but you can also see this policy take root in northeastern territories of India. You can see it take root in places in central India where communist and leftist folks are looking to hold on to Adivasi land. There's a lot of different ways in which you could sort of make this analysis, right? But I do want to draw attention to the two maps that are on the right-hand side of the screen, right? The one is the ideal Zionist state, right, which does not only include Palestine includes Transjordan, includes parts of Syria, right? Sinai. And the same idea of a Hindu Rashtra that is meant to, it's an explicitly expansionist ideology, right? It's not just meant to have control over what is now modern India, but it's an expansionist ideology that aims to, have this incredibly far reach. So in terms of like how this, and this again, I've already seen numerous recommendations to read Hostile Homelands. I highly recommend it. I have it on my last slide as well. But in terms of like tracking, how did this come to happen, right? I saw quite a few questions of, India started out, at least in terms of its language around Palestine, as being pro-Palestine, right? When it came to be in the 40s and 50s. How did this sort of happen where we're now seeing a modern India unabashedly in support of not only of Israel, but of the concept of Zionism? And what I'll say, and again, I do recommend reading this book, but what I'll say as a very kind of reductive way of framing it is that this back channel diplomacy has always existed pretty much since the inception of both countries, right? It's existed with regards to arms sales as early as the 50s and 60s. But with regard to this publicly facing diplomatic relationship, you're really starting to see this take shape in 1992. So this is when you're actually seeing prime ministers of the two countries visiting the other, and handshakes and photo ops and calling the other revolutionary visionaries and things like that. You're really starting to see that take shape in the early 1990s, which more or less coincides with the real rise of the BJP. Though I also do want to caution us looking acutely or exclusively at the BJP as the only sort of manifestation of Hindutva in India and in South Asia. And I think I saw Sharmin post this already, right? But India is the largest purchaser in the world of Israeli arms exports. And I believe India buys a lot of arms from a lot of people, but I think Israel ranks fourth. So for it being such a small country, you can think of the scale of what that means, right? And one, I think, like particularly explicit example, right, is this guy, this billionaire, Gautam Adani. He works in his ventures work incredibly close with Elbit, who obviously Elbit Systems manufacture many of the weapons that are being used in the ongoing genocide. But again, this is just one of many examples. So I guess so we're talking right about India and what does this look like in India, right? But why does this matter here, right? So Hindutva, it might not be as explicit, it might not hold the kind of explicit power that it does in India yet, right? But it has existed for almost over 50 years, right? So the movement here in the United States, the way it looks is very similar to how it looks in India, and that's because what essentially has happened is a satellite campus, right, of Hindutva ideology of the RSS in India has been sort of planted here. So here in the U.S., that diffuse network sort of operates under the umbrella of the VHPA. And again, the diffuse network is it's a very intentional model, right? The reason it exists in this way is because if one organization, if one education arm, for example, or if one think tank, or if one political action committee does something untowards, right? If they say something explicitly that white liberals see as explicitly ethno-nationalist or explicitly racist, right? Explicitly Islamophobic. The network kind of comes together to say, oh no, that doesn't represent our ideology, right? That's just this one organization. That's just this one. And you see, and the reason I'm drawing attention to this model and this idea is because you really do see this same idea. This is how Zionism took root and took shape in our country, right? You have these large, you have the APACs, right, of the world that are doing all this mass funding, but you have all these organizations, right? You have organizations existing on college campuses. You have organizations existing in Jewish temples, right? You have indoctrination happening for kids as early as 5 and 6, in whether it's schools or temples or at home, right? You have nonprofits supporting birthright trips, right? This is very intentional. It's very strategic, and I just want to name that Hindutva is doing that exact same thing. So, like I mentioned, we have over 50 years here of seeing the VHPA. This was a direct kind of order of Ahmed Golvarkar, who's quote unquote one of the fathers of Hindutva. But between then and now, there's dozens and dozens of local chapters around the country. And just one other sort of key similarity or key way that Hindutva is in conversation with Zionism, right, is that one of the biggest kind of goals, I think, of proponents of Hindutva here in the United States is to position this idea of Hindu phobia as, this explicit racist sort of thing, right? In the same way that Zionists have conflated anti-Zionism, or they've attempted, right, to conflate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. Hindutva folk are attempting to do that same work, that same conflation between any sort of valid critique of ethno-nationalism, of Islamophobia, of caste supremacist narratives, right? They're doing the same work, and again, I think that's another way that Hindutva is very much in conversation with Zionism. And again, right, just when zooming out and you start to see all these nodes and these tentacles and things take shape, right? You really start to see how similar it is to the way Zionism operates here in the United States. And just sort of moving now into, okay, so Hindutva does exist, right, in the United States. Like, what functionally, what does that actually look like? So there's a VHPA member at the January 6th insurrection, right? That same person is incredibly active in his local VHPA to this day, and was one of the key organizers for a car rally for Ayodhya's Ram Mandir, which, for folks who, again, this is going to be very reductive, broad strokes summary, but there's a mandir or a temple dedicated to the Hindu god Ram in the city of Ayodhya in India that happened pretty recently, a few decades after the destruction of a centuries-old masjid on that same site. So there's a lot to be said about that story, but what is most important, I think, to know is that it's become, since January, it's become, when it was, officially dedicated and opened, it's become this lightning rod for Hindutva folks, and this conflation of pride in all of India has become, this Ram Mandir has become a massive symbol of India, right? Or that's the conflation that they're attempting to do, to the point where in the Indian Independence Day parade here in New York on the 18th, the largest float, the centerpiece of the entire parade, will be this large model of this Ram Mandir. So you're really starting to see, again, like this project that this Hindu Rashtra that proponents of Hindutva are aiming for. You're really starting to see it take shape, right? In really tangible and really scary ways. So, obviously the insurrection, and then we have really close partnerships across the country with far right and anti-Muslim extremists, right? They call themselves the counter jihad movement. I'm sure many of you know who Robert Spencer is. Pamela Geller and Stuart Kaufman are a couple of other folks. They run these, faux think tanks, and they have these podcasts and things. They're, very, very thinly veiled. They're not. I wouldn't even call them veiled at all, right? They're explicitly calling for Muslim deportation, and they're warning against the Islamization of the United States and all these things. And Hindutva proponents are doing the exact same thing at home in India, right? They're warning of these Muslim invaders. They believe that there's an Islamization of India happening, and they prey on these sort of narratives to kind of galvanize a base, right? And it's not just politicians. It's not just folks in high places in the VHPA. They're pulling your everyday Indian American much further to the right in terms of how they engage politically, right? So yes, you're seeing more political candidates that embody this convergence between Hindu nationalism and white Christian nationalism, because ultimately, right, all nationalist ideologies benefit from being in conversation with and being in allyship with one another, right? That's why you see Christian Zionists in such vocal support of Israel, right? I think one important statistic to note is that Trump's vote share of Indian Americans doubled between 2016 and 2020. And Americans for Hindus, which is a PAC founded by VHPA affiliates, if you look at their endorsements and who they support and things like that, you'll see a heavy slate of, almost exclusively far right people. And yeah, so I think obviously, again, this is meant to be a really high level, broad strokes, introduction, right? I'm really excited for the conversation, but just in terms of what folks can do next, right? I saw a lot of references to hostile homelands. I really, really do recommend it. I recommend it even if you're not Indian. Honestly, I think it's really important. India is the most populous country in the world. They're doing a lot to kind of shore up military power and cozy up to much larger, in terms of financial and military might, Western powers. It's an incredibly important analysis that Azad has made. And a lot of my learning has come directly from it. As far as learning a lot more about the VHPA itself, I would point folks, and I think I did see some questions about this being available after. I'll be sending, Turner already has the slides, and I'm totally fine with them sending this out to folks. So these links will be in there. But so Savera, which is a coalition that HFHR is a part of, along with a few other organizations, has these really, really in-depth reports on who the VHPA are, how they manifest in sort of our political lives, and kind of the danger that comes from not taking them seriously. So in addition to reading those reports, you can also sign their organizational statement or coalition statement against Hindu supremacy, which is for any orgs that you might be a part of. And there's also a petition to condemn Indian complicity in the genocide in Gaza, particularly with relation to weapons, and that anyone can sign. And just in terms of what's next, I know a lot of folks here probably have folks in their family, folks in their communities, friends, right? Folks they went to school with, who haven't been challenged enough on some of their opinions on caste supremacy, whether it's the dangers of Hindutva, right? So my question I just want to ask for folks is, like, taking this information, how can you better sort of arm yourself, equip yourself to make those challenges, to make those sort of to make those demands of the people in your life, right? And there linked also is a zine that, again, my colleague Pranay developed. I borrowed very heavily from it in today's presentation, but it's open source. It's available for anyone to sort of do this work in their communities. That we saw a lot of it start to happen during the student encampments in the late spring. And
giving you a little time check.
Cool. I'm almost done. And then I think if you don't already have one, which I'm sure people in this call have one in some way, but if you don't have what I would call a political home, like please find one. It's how we build sustained movements, and it's how we go from kind of ideas to action. I especially encourage if you do identify as like South Asian American and have this and identify with this idea of building a Hindu left, you can join us. I'm happy to talk more about it. But there's also plenty of great organizations represented here in this panel and also here in the chat. It seems like so just find that home if you don't already have one. And that's it.
Thank you. That was amazing. And I'm gonna remove your spotlight and bring on our next speaker. Let's see. Karamvir, you can stop your video and then, okay, now I'm adding your spotlight. There you are.
Okay. Can everyone hear
Perfect.
me clearly?
I can hear you.
Okay, awesome. Hello. My pronouns are she and her. I'm with Asians for Palestine. And yeah, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I want to say thank you to Nikhil and 18 Million Rising for spotlighting Asians for Palestine, New York City, for all of the work that we're doing. On this first slide, you'll see Melon, who is our visible marker that we have at a lot of our actions. And I'm going to get into a little bit of why lion dancing is important. But Melon, pronouns she and her, she is a very sacred member of Asians for Palestine, and we really hold her near to our hearts. And yeah. So who are we? So Asians for Palestine, we are Asians across the diaspora in New York City, and we feel like we're strategically positioned to tell the truth about this genocide. We have been protesting with our voices, bodies, dollars, and honestly will continue to do so until Palestine is free. We currently operate under our 3 R's, which are reclamation, recognition, and restoration. Reclamation means that we reclaim our Asian history by rediscovering our ancestors' roles in resisting oppression. So just relearning what has happened in our history. And we work to connect these struggles to Palestine's fight for freedom and self-determination, while also rejecting the model minority myth that exists to divide our communities. Recognition, we recognize that the East Asian communities have privilege in Asian American movements, and sometimes they do overshadow South Asian, Southeast Asian, West Asia, and Central Asian people. Asians for Palestine, we are committed to honoring the diverse experiences, cultures, and liberations of our very vast Asian communities that exist here. And honestly, we're not here to free Palestine. Palestine will free us. And our last R, which is restoration, means that we're revitalizing ancestral wisdom and survival skills to safeguard our efforts. And we offer trainings and mutual aid, such as meal delivery, childcare, counseling, legal support, and all of this to just make sure that our organizers are doing well. So the Asian model minority myth, I think a lot of y'all might know what this means, but I'm going to cover it really quickly. So oftentimes Asians can be portrayed as law-abiding, hardworking, and successful people, and this is used to contrast and pit one group against another, is very similar to Zionist narratives, where they often are depicted as pioneers who turned a desert into a thriving state and embody ideals of hard work, resilience, and success. This term was first coined, of course, by white supremacist William Peterson back in 1966, and it was used to really steer East Asian Americans away from communist and socialist sentiments during the Cold War. Um, at that time as well, there were selective immigration policies that favored educated, skilled, merchant class folks. And this basically perpetuated this myth of the Asian model minority. So right now, this narrative can be used to obscure systematic inequalities and injustices faced by the Palestinian people and other marginalized communities. So this next slide, I'm not going to obviously get into each of the different things that are on here, but this is just a snapshot of a few moments of Asian history. Obviously, again, I won't be able to give it the attention that it deserves, but I will say these moments in history were often a source of pain for our ancestors. And through these moments, they were able to find a lot of power and resistance. So I say this and I bring this up to say that no matter what background you come from, I really urge that you explore some moments in your own history to find strength to help you in this movement. Because again, this movement is not going to be slow. It's going to be something we need to build upon for the years to come. And it is important, just like Nikhil said before, to find your home, find your community, and yeah. So first, we're going to dive into reclamation. One of our first actions this year, and it's hard to believe that we are so new, we just began this year, but one of our early actions was the Lunar New Year parade in Chinatown. We disrupted it using banner drops, a lion dance, a takeover of East Broadway with over 100 people involved. We ended up giving out zines that were translated and snacks, candy, and just political education to the aunties and uncles of Chinatown. The purpose of this event at that time was to bring awareness to, of course, the genocide in Palestine, but also to raise visibility about the largest skyscraper prison that is being built in Chinatown as we speak. And the builders of that prison are also Zionists. So it is just a reminder that everything is connected and we need to be very aware of that. Zionism has its very, very evil roots in a lot of the things that we may enjoy today, which includes our subscriptions, just the places we like to visit, the things we might enjoy. So I would just highly recommend that if there is something that inside of you that wants to look at Zionism and see how it has its roots within your own community, please take time to just go through that. It is a lot of work, and sometimes it can feel like, oh my God, will we ever be able to move past this? But I hope through how I describe our work, you'll know that it is possible. So yeah, so the Lunar New Year disruption was, of course, very celebratory, but what people don't realize is that Lunar New Year, the celebration itself had its deep historical roots in rebellion against the Qing dynasty. So the color red is something that we often see during this time, and it's considered to be incredibly lucky. And originally, it symbolized the blood that was spilled in opposition to the emperor. Lion dancers are often rebels, and they would disguise themselves to get into the halls of the Qing loyalists. So as you can see, our action, which consisted of the lion dancing, the color red, etc., was incredibly symbolic and was meant to reclaim that history. We also are working together to challenge stereotypes that exist within our own communities, aka being a passive, apolitical Asian person. But we just want to go ahead and promote accurate representation of each of our communities as well. This is often done by building coalitions with local organizations, investing in local community resources, and one of our strongest beliefs at the collective is that political education should never be limited to a certain environment, like AKA stuffy academic hall, but can also happen anywhere. It can happen just going to our aunties and uncles that are sitting in the park. It can happen going to Jackson Heights in Queens. And we have brought these conversations through Asians for Palestine to Flushing, Chinatown, Jackson Heights, and a lot of other places in New York City through festivals, parades, mutual aid events. For example, in Jackson Heights a couple of months ago, we hosted an iftar mutual aid in collaboration with Trump and Angry Asian Woman, and we ended up giving out 200 iftar packages, self-defense kits, which included pepper spray, halal candies, zines, and leave it blank flyers that were translated for the appropriate languages of the area. And I have to say, as somebody that is part of Asians for Palestine, I was at first a little bit nervous about what people were going to say, how they would feel. But overall, the community has been so heartwarming. They have been very open, curious, and engaged with us. And honestly, yeah, just wearing a kufiya at these actions have been very helpful as well, because folks had questions about that, and being able to tie everything back to Palestine because everything is connected so deeply has been also very empowering for us. So in order to do the work, we need to hold Asians in Power accountable. So we have been targeting certain Asian people and organizations in power. The first one would be TAF, which is the Asian American Foundation. I will not get into this too deeply because Sharmin will go ahead and talk about this next, but our main target has been Grace Meng. In New York City, Grace Meng represents New York City's 6th congressional district, which includes West, Central, and Northeast Queens, which is pretty much most of Queens, to be honest. So yeah, why do we target her? Because Grace Meng is hella problematic. She has gone out of her way to support Zionists and uphold their ideologies. If you do a quick scroll of her Twitter, or X page, you will see everything that we are talking about. She also accepts and is known to accept thousands of dollars from AIPAC. And we have done so many actions against Grace Meng, and I'm going to kind of list out what we have done in the past. Our first ever action, which was actually in Flushing, included a disruption of Grace Meng's speech, which she ended up actually kind of leaving and walking away from. We have asked people, and we've been petty about this, to call, fax, and email Grace Meng so she understands that we exist and like she does not represent our community. We got her fundraiser, which she was hosting at Pearl River Mart, a Chinatown staple, to be canceled. We hand delivered an open letter to Grace Meng's office in collaboration with Drum Beats, which is a local organization that had over 1,200 signatures with endorsements by 49 organizations. So we also disrupted several Zoom calls that she had, but one specific one was a AAPI Power Hour. And we also went to her home and protested in front of her home on Land Day. And this was in collaboration with Queens Ceasefire, Centro Corona, and Queens Neighborhood United. And lastly, one of our members bird dogged Grace in the elevator. All of these things that we have done, including a lot of other actions, are going to be available on our Instagram, which is Asians for Palestine New York City. There's videos, pictures, testimonies, whatever you need on our Instagram to show you the work we have done and will continue to do. So this next slide is just highlighting how we've used art to inspire all of us collectively to be great. We have wheat pasted Asian activist faces because I think sometimes as an Asian person, we may not see activists that look like us on the field doing this work, but in order to kind of bridge that gap, we have been wheat pasting faces that may feel more familiar to us. We've used Sailor Moon art on a buck drum, and all in all, we have found alternative ways to raise awareness around Palestine using our own culture. So next, we have used language as a form of justice, and we've used these in action. So some of them include creating a jail support flyer in Chinese to help bridge the gap between Chinese community members and protesters. This specifically really helped folks who were doing jail support at One Police Plaza, which is often where we go when folks are arrested for protesting or during encampments, etc. These flyers were important because they explained why jail support was present, why people were protesting, and how the local community can help. We also translated our Lunar New Year zines in English and Chinese to again help connect with our community. We translated Leave It Blank flyers in Chinese, Bangla, Punjabi, and Urdu to again, bridge that divide. And also, I think as I'm Punjabi myself, and I think sometimes there's this like thing that we do where we're like, oh, I don't know what's happening. Politics is confusing. I'm not going to get into it. And we were hoping with the language justice actions we've been doing that that can help bridge the gap because education is important in order for us to, really start from the ground up and invite people into our movement versus just, I don't know. I think sometimes there's these titles that we put on people, and that's not helpful when we want to work with our community. So the last action that we have on this page is the From the River to the Sea facts action. We were pretty petty towards Grace Bang, who had at that time signed a resolution that condemned this phrase as anti-Semitic. Our facts action ended up saying that phrase, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free in about 12 languages to let Grace Bang know that we're not going to be silenced or bullied into not speaking about Palestine. So our last R, which is restoration and healing, is basically about taking care of our members that we have. And we just recently had an event, a little community picnic where we had herbal tinctures, teas, readings, tarot readings, and other healing services that were provided as mutual aid. We also have held trainings around protesting safety with a nonviolent peace force and a digital security training with 18 Million Rising. We do all of this so we can focus on, yes, expanding our skills and resources within our collective, but also to prevent burnout. Because oftentimes we are so moved by emotion and we feel like we must do something because it is important. That we often forget to take care of ourselves. And as hardworking people as we are, we do need to also make sure that we are doing what's best for our bodies, our mind, and our spirits. So we are now emphasizing this part because this is a reminder that this movement is a long one. And if we burn out within a couple of months, what is the point, we need to make sure we hold each other in solidarity. And this is our way of taking care of one another, checking in with one another, and just doing things that are not maybe, quote unquote actions, but just another way of connecting, which is also important in movements like this. I think getting to know people that you are organizing with is important instead of just organizing and just doing actions, which is great because you're putting everything on the line to do those things. It is also very important to have conversations with people, ask them how they're doing, and make sure we connect with one another because sometimes we can be so work focused that we forget that a person comes with a whole lot of other stuff. And we have found through our interactions that we've been able to help one another and just take care of us. If we've had issues at work or we have just like fears that come up that are very natural, even as organizers that, want to do this work for the long term. I know sometimes I have these really like insane thoughts at night, like, oh my God, what if I can never, it's just like you get into a fear mindset, and just speaking to someone that is part of the collective that understands the work I'm doing has been insanely helpful to keep it moving. I say this all to say, all skin folk ain't kinfolk. And I say this because we have Nikki Haley here and Grace Bang here. And as an Asian person myself, and as a Punjabi person, I'm horrified by who Nikki Haley chooses to be all the time. But this is a reminder that identity politics is not anything that would help us. If your whole political vision is that if someone looks like you, supports you, or represents you, I would highly say like maybe you should consider rethinking that narrative because identity politics have historically never saved us. People who look like us can be in power, but often take on white supremacy or Zionist ways of thinking to save themselves and protect their own people. I wouldn't even say own people, own selves, own families. They don't look out for the greater community. So yeah, this is a reminder that we should always remain principled. Think of what your principles are and stick to them. Make sure that no matter who the candidate is, we're not just stepping aside to accept whatever they say, but also to involve yourself in reclamation, recognition, and restoration efforts yourself. Because this is important, no matter what community you choose to be in. I found that these three principles are just very highly important and help remind us that as long as we are able to remain grounded in who we are, why we're doing this, we're able to move forward and yeah, like get in tune with yourself, get in tune with your people, your history, find ways to empower yourself in times of true darkness as we are facing. Because I will say it is important now more than ever that you find people you resonate with and stick with them. Even if you create change through just talking to one person in your community, I will say that that's change. I think sometimes we think you need to do this large scale action to make a difference. And I would have to disagree with that. Some of my most beautiful moments came from just one-on-one interactions with people in my community that I would have never had if I didn't face my own fears of being in community and being myself within my community. Um, yeah, and the last thing I will say is that thank you to everyone for listening. Thank you for giving us a spotlight to 18 Million Rising. And I also wanted to highlight that since doing our work in New York City, we have had people from all around also create their own chapters of Asians for Palestine. So now we have Asians for Palestine DMV, we have Asians for Palestine Bay Area, and we have Asians for Palestine Twin Cities. Please support their work just as you are supporting ours. As you know, we love the support, but we also really want to see this movement go across the world and become global, because that's what is needed to sustain a movement at this rate that we are going. And yeah, that is all I have for you. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Thank you. Let's give Karamvir a shout out in the chat for sharing all of that. And then last but not least, we have Sharmin, who's joining us. I'm adding a spotlight right now. And here we go.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. This is one of the juiciest chats I've been a part of. So I really appreciate everybody sharing, and we're definitely going to incorporate people's feedback and thoughts into how we get next steps going. My name is Sharmin. As mentioned earlier, I'm the organizing director at 18 Million Rising. I'm on Lenape land in Philadelphia right now. I wanted to open up to just acknowledge the global revolutions that are happening. Many of you come from countries and places and spaces where people have been resisting for generations. Turner highlighted Vietnam, the Tamil Tigers, the Dalit Panthers. They're all a part of a legacy of people that have stood on the right side of history, unlike the Nikki Haley's and Kamala Harris's of the world. I'm from Bangladesh, which is a formerly colonized nation that fought for its independence in the 1970s against Pakistani colonization. And the US supported Pakistan at the time, and they still do, right? The US sent weapons and arms to kill and brutalize my people. And at that time, when the resistance movement was happening, students were uprising. There were Quakers, where I am in Lenape land, that blocked weapons going to Bangladesh. And so when I think about those moments of those activists that put their bodies literally on the line, I think about all the culture work it took, all the creative work it took to popularize a movement to stop a genocide in Bangladesh. So we had the Beatles, for example, throw a concert for Bangladesh during that period of time. We also had different states recognizing Bangladesh across the Pan-Asian community that were a part of this like moment of third world internationalism. And even in the 1980s, there were Bangladeshi freedom fighters that volunteered to join the Palestinian Liberation Front in Lebanon. Those are all parts of a history that we're often told that do not exist, right? That our people have always been model minorities or they've always been neoliberal, but that's not true. Our people are constantly organizing in the face of authoritarianism here and abroad. Right now, the ruling government of Bangladesh has been murdering and attacking student activists and civilians who have been rising up against the neoliberal capture of the university. What started off as an anti like corruption movement, it started off as a movement against the quotas that are reserved for the elite of the country, has now become a national movement to demand the Sheikh Hasina government step down and stop the political violence against dissenters. So student protests have really brought on military rule and economic shutdown, as well as a media shutdown and a blackout that has left millions of people without access to their phones and their family. So I really want to ground us in this moment we're in, this intifada or this uprising that we're talking about. It's not only in Palestine. People across the world are rising up because we know authoritarianism is expanding. Next slide, please. We're going to talk a little bit about the ways that we see authoritarianism creeping into our Asian American political fabric. Many of you know about the Asian American Foundation. They're a foundation that was founded in 2021 with really good hopes, right, to stop Asian hate. They got over $1.1 billion worth of seed money, and they fund organizations that we love. Some of these organizations are getting out the vote in our Asian communities, while others are fighting for Asian American studies programs across the country. But little did we know that Jonathan Greenblatt, who's the CEO of the Anti-Defamation League, is also a founding member of the Asian American Foundation. Next slide, please. Greenblatt and the Anti-Defamation League have been playing a key role in suppressing pro-Palestinian movements and student movements. They support anti-Semitic and right-wing influencers. They surveil organizers, and they also attack Muslims and activists that are fighting against the genocide. Greenblatt is an all-around bad person. Why is the Asian American Foundation keeping him on their board? Next slide, please. Thousands of us have been asking that. An open letter was published with over 70 organizations that were actually a part of the Asian American community and allied to demand that they drop Jonathan Greenblatt. We demanded that they seize any working relationships with the ADL and renew TAF's commitment to support the Muslim and Asian American leadership that is committed to ending the US war machine. And so for us, when we saw TAF deciding to stay silent on Palestine, it really forced us to think about how can we mass mobilize? How can we work with other Asians to make sure that Palestine becomes an Asian American issue too? Because if we stop Asian hate, we also mean Palestinians too. Next slide, please. And so we've had a bunch of organizing wins since. We've sent over 18,000 letters to the staff and board members of the Asian American Foundation. There are some badass people like You and Me Books that withdrew from the TAF Gala as a vendor. The Asian American Studies Association said no to a $50,000 grant because of their BDS policy, which means that they boycott, divest, and sanction Israel. And Asians for Palestine New York threw a protest outside of the gala, where later we found out that there was an API culinary conference that a bunch of cool chefs boycotted. So all of these momentum moments are actually building towards a larger politic of Asian American people that are saying no to genocide, but also looking at our own house and looking at the way Asians are complicit in these structures of power. Next slide, please. I'm inviting you all to a quick action because no call is complete without taking action. If you can quickly type in your computer, your phones, bit.ly/no to Zionism, you can keep the momentum going. We've already flooded their inbox with 18,000 letters, and they think that we're just some fringe group of leftists that will die down or we're going to shut up. But we know that we're actually not going to shut up. And every time Taft's name is mentioned, we're going to be like, hey, what's up with Jonathan Greenblatt? Are you guys still friends with him? And we want to keep letting them know that we're not going to stay silent. So grantees, philanthropic partners, organizers, we're all ringing the alarm. And this legacy of challenging Zionism, it's not just happening at Taft. You know, there have been a lot of movement since October 7th of people that have been calling on Asian American organizations, like when the API Council accepted an award from the Jewish Community Relations Council. The Jewish Community Relations Council is known in the Bay Area to be a super Zionist organization that attacks Muslims and pro-Palestinian organizing. So a bunch of people wrote an open letter to API Council, and they were like, guys, don't accept this award. It's a dirty award. And then there was also the Japanese American Citizens League that was organizing after October 7th to get their organization to stop collaborating with Zionists. One of the things that we really want to highlight for people on this panel that are learning with us is Zionists like to claim that they are victims too. That similar to the way the Japanese were interned or the way that Asians are experiencing hate crimes, they want to equate their definition of anti-Semitism to Asian American struggles of racism and the things that we go through in our communities with being excluded, right? And so it's really important for us as leftists and progressives to get familiar with how the right wing likes to claim victim, but also how they position themselves as allies to organizations and partners in our ecosystem. Sometimes it's like an innocent, yeah, we'll throw some money at this gala, we'll co-sponsor, while other times they're actively influencing local policy and local coalitions by making sure that their agenda and their talking point is thrown into the mix. Next slide, please. I hope you guys all sent your letter because that's an action for today. And the next thing I wanted to highlight was Jewish Voice for Peace, our friends, are actually getting school boards to drop the ADL. So they're organizing to get the momentum up around who the ADL is because Wikipedia just banned the ADL as a viable source. So that means that we can actually use this momentum to tell our local school boards to reject the ADL. Because one thing that a lot of people don't know is that the ADL, not only do they train the police, they also are a part of school curriculum all across the country, where they do this K-12 curriculum called A World of Difference. And that curriculum is heavily influenced by their Zionist pedagogy, but also their racist agendas to paint issues of race and imperialism as not important. So we really are joining the call with partners like Jewish Voice for Peace, who are working in this faceted like coalition to get the ADL out of schools. Next, I'm going to move on to this like politic that we're really engaging with here, which is like the underlying roots of Zionism, white supremacy, Hindutva is war. All of these groups of people want violence and they want war and imperialism to justify their demands for like saying that we as communities of color are the left that is trying to victimize them, right? And one of the ways they do this is by military exchanges. RIMPAC is the Rim of the Pacific. It's actually the world's largest maritime military exercise that happens on occupied Hawaiian lands. And RIMPAC happens to be this international war game that the US hosts, and they include military allies like Israel. Approximately 29 nations participate in this, while 25,000 military personnel participate. A lot of these nations that participate, y'all, are Asian. We're talking Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Indonesia, and India. And if I say those countries, they ring a bell, right? A lot of them have authoritarian governments. A lot of them have weapons contracts with Israel. And a lot of them suppress democracy and people power in their countries. Israel is currently participating in these war games. They share their military tactics, they test their weapons, and they take these tactics to repress people across Asia in alignment with US imperialism. Next. A part of the issue that I really want to highlight, y'all, is a lot of organizations and Asian American movements don't always throw down when it comes to protecting people's lands, when it comes to protecting people's power. A lot of Asian Americans have actually historically not done enough to fight against RIMPAC, to fight for Hawaiians that are demanding that the US military leave their territories, right? If we are to be in solidarity as an API community, we actually have this big umbrella of anti-war and anti-militarism that we can get under. And a huge part of API solidarity is to fight to protect land and water, right? And so as we're fighting US empire, we really want to think about these campaigns like the Cancel RIMPAC campaign that have been led by folks like Hawaii Peace and Justice, and even there's like dissenters chapters in those areas. These are the people that are Pacific Islanders and Asians that are like, y'all, if you want to fight violence, start at the land, right? So we just want to shout them out and show y'all a really compelling campaign that we really need to get behind. Every couple of years, these war games happen. And so we come back home, y'all. The war is at home, right? Yesterday was a terrifying day for so many of us. Netanyahu took to Congress yesterday, a war criminal that has overseen the murder of 40,000 plus Palestinian people, received a standing ovation from our Congress yesterday. He justified the slaughter of all these Palestinians in Gaza. He asked Congress for bipartisan support to finish the job. And while Rashida Tlaib, the lone Palestinian in Congress, was holding a sign that said guilty of genocide on her birthday, right? I hope all of you show love to people that are on the streets. Our partners at Drum and Cav were out on the streets yesterday to demand that this war criminal be arrested and that we try him for the crimes that the ICJ has already found him guilty of. And so as our job at 18 Million Rising, it's really to bring these campaigns to the national light and create anti-imperialist groups of Asians that are willing to take these issues into our local politics, into the way we vote, into how we talk about the issues in our community. Next slide. Two of the things that we really want folks to start taking action around and thinking about is this Not Another Bomb campaign that the Uncommitted campaign has been galvanizing around to really get those people that want us to vote for them to commit to not sending another bomb. We've also been supporting actions by the US Campaign for Palestinian Rights to stop arming Israel. And those are going to be campaigns that we're going to lead into the March on the DNC, which is going to be happening in Chicago at the end of August. And it'll be another moment of national power building for us to keep these demands at the front and center. I think a lot of people like to pretend that the pro-Palestinian voice or the anti-imperialist voice is a margin, right? That we are like a minority fringe group. But let's be real, Biden probably would have never dropped if it wasn't for the organizing we did. And a lot of the ways that people are even conflicted about this election cycle, about what it means for us to be in solidarity with people that are experiencing a genocide, those are all the questions that we're here to engage with you around. Next slide. So I saw a lot of people opening signal groups. I saw a lot of people wanting contact sheets, and we love that. 18MR is going to do our part, y'all. We're going to continue holding member meetings to get people to sign up to join these local action groups. Just like we were in DC yesterday, we're going to continue supporting our partners all across the country to do direct actions, to rabble rouse, to make sure that the issues that you find important are at the table, and we are going to flank and support those efforts. So you can sign up using this bit.ly. Our amazing digital organizer, Leanne, has been doing one-on-ones with many of you. We want to continue making sure that you guys are supported and organized, and that we as Asians are organized. So I hope you join us in this work. I hope you answer the call, and I'll pass it to Turner to walk us through the rest of the day.
All right, folks. I'm just getting Karamvir, if you could come back on video too. Yes, thank you. And I'm going to spotlight everyone, including myself. All right. Amazing. Thank you, everyone, for all of the brilliance that you shared. And the chat was going wild. Thank you, everyone in the chat, for sharing all of your knowledge. There's so many links that I will have to collect after this. But it's really so exciting to see everyone come together and talk. It's clearly so needed for us to be in community and in spaces. So just thank you. We've got about 11 minutes left for Q&A. We're going to jump into Q&A. And so for our lovely speakers, you can also check out those questions that our lovely tech support and security team has been collecting. So I'm gonna ask this first question for Nikhil from Meghna. Could I ask some clarification regarding indigeneity? Is Hinduism not indigenous to India, or am I not thinking about this in the right way? I've always been told that it's indigenous to India, so I haven't come across a different perspective.
Yeah, good question. So I think I should clarify. It's not that Hinduism is not indigenous, or it didn't, like, its origins aren't in India. It's more so that proponents of Hindutva weaponize this idea of indigeneity to claim that Hindus are the only folks who are indigenous to the land. And in doing so, they otherize, ostracize, and promote displacement, occupation of, violence against Muslims, Sikhs, even folks of oppressed caste who do identify as Hindu, right? So it's not that, and in this way, I'm drawing that connection to Zionism, right? Because Zionists and even just liberal Zionists, or folks who don't know enough about it, or who are afraid to sound anti-Semitic, they all say the same thing, right? Which is that Jews are indigenous to the land, and therefore, and this is the kind of precursor, or the premise for this occupation, displacement, and genocide. So it's not that Hinduism isn't quote unquote indigenous, or didn't start in India, but it's this weaponization, right?
Thank you so much for that. And I've got a question for Karamvir. This is about the Squirtle meme and water bottle meme. That's used as an example of art. I personally love it, but how do we reconcile with the memification of social justice? Feels like the Hello Kitty says ACAB trend during the George Floyd protests. I'm an artist and believe in the power of art to make change, but how do we go about this?
Yeah, that's a really good point and question overall. I will say, this is just me answering, but I feel like the path to justice is not one way. I feel like it means doing a number of things, and humor should be a part of that path as well. I think it becomes this thing where folks become a little bit apprehensive of us not taking things seriously enough and think that it's just becoming something more passive or whatnot. But artists also play a role in social justice, and just as people who are on the ground are doing the same thing. And I think I always try to remind people that everybody has a place in social justice. Everyone is able to find a path forward. If we only had one path forward, I think all of us wouldn't be as different as we are. I think there's a real reason why we are so diverse as people. It's because we're all needed in our diversity. I think also with the memification, or just like using Hello Kitty or whatnot, is also taking away from the fact that like Hello Kitty at its core is super Zionist, and we're trying to revamp that into our pro-Palestinian efforts over here. And I think all of this comes back down to education and why it's important to know what is happening. And yeah, art is also beautiful. It helps us connect to one another. And I've seen a lot of these stickers that we have at protests, and have just been around, and I've been really enjoying seeing it. And I think it's important for people to be visually also appealed to. So yeah.
Thanks for that. All right, we've got another question. And this is, I think for everyone, because you approach it from your own position. So how do we connect and create spaces like this solidarity in our local areas? So grateful for all the information. How can we amplify what you're doing?
Sorry, is that for me?
It's I
Oh,
think for
okay.
everyone, I think it's for everyone in a sense, because you're all doing like Nikhil, you're doing coalition work. You're bringing people together. So it's also a question for you. It's a question for Sharmin. We are all trying to bring people together in some way and do that connection to change the culture, right?
Yeah, I'll just share, like, I think one of the strongest forms of power I've seen in the last 9 months has been like the autonomous group of people that are willing to take action and protect each other from the beginning to the end of the action. And so skilling up in what it takes to do a banner drop, or what it takes to do a disruption, or what it takes to even shut down an event, right? I think we are past the moment of like, thinking that a rally or a march is the end of our work. We actually have to get creative with like, those 198 methods of nonviolent resistance that have been gifted to us by our predecessors, that are really thinking about organizing as a science that we all commit to experimenting with. And so, I think Asians for Palestine is an example of like what it takes for autonomous groups of people that don't have to do it within their 501c3 or their corporate job to really push the needle on what is possible. And I think it also gives a layer of cover for people where we don't have one or two people getting in trouble for like doing something a little, spicy. Instead, it's like a bunch of people that are willing to say, yeah, we're going to say the thing, and we're going to give each other cover. So I will say, like, the local trust building is effective because anywhere you go in a city, there is either a Zionist or white supremacist power force there. And those are the people that need to be agitated because, like you guys are saying in the chat, they're capturing our people. They're getting them at the mandir, they're getting them at the synagogue, and they are able to provide culture and space and relationships that the left needs to be better at providing. So we've been experimenting with hosting socials, meeting people up at a book club, or even like going to a film screening together to be able to actually have community that is antithetical to the right-wing power structures.
Anyone
Yeah,
else have thoughts? Yeah.
I was gonna, Charmin, completely agree. I would also say like food is an excellent way to connect with people. Some of the earliest actions I went to were just like eating food from Palestinian vendors or just Palestinian restaurants nearby, and just like having a conversation about what the food meant, and like just really getting to the depth of that. And Yeah, I think depending on where you live, like I live in Queens, so going to Jackson Heights and finding other people that are super into what I'm into has been really helpful. And I think also being open to reimagining what community looks like, because I didn't think I would be part of Asians for Palestine. It happened, and like it's been beautiful ride so far. But in reality, at first, I was just solo going to protest, kind of being involved in like one-off things, and over time I found what fit for me. So I would say like be ready to try on a lot of different hats and find what works best for you.
Yeah, just to answer that question, folks are asking about vetting on the Google form. If you answer the question, just share any org you're involved with and or if you attended this event, just so we know where you're coming in from, because we have to keep each other safe.
Nikhil, it looks like you're trying to unmute.
No, I was reading the chat a little bit. Yeah, I mean, I think it was all really well said. I don't want to add too much. I think just also just adding, it doesn't have to be like one or the other. So in terms of like situating yourself in a political home, for example, like the reason I do this work, and this is a job that I do for a 501c3, right? Which is different from how Karamvir organizes with Asians for Palestine. Um, and and I don't necessarily think it has to be one or the other, right? So like I do this work because I see violence happening in my name as a past oppressor person of Hindu heritage, right? Um, and then there's also tons of great autonomous work going on here in New York. Asians for Palestine is a great example. Salam, which is a South Asian leftist autonomous group, is another one. And it's in coalition with, in collaboration with, doing things with one and doing things with another. I think that's one of the ways that you find that you build sustained movement. So just wanting to lift up that there are so many different points of entry in these ecosystems, and I think it doesn't necessarily have to be one or the other, right? You can find your ways to insert yourself. What are the opportunities within your workplace? What are the opportunities outside of it? What are the opportunities to have conversations with your family members, right? All these things should be happening simultaneously, I think.
Yeah, thank you so much for all of your thoughts, everyone. I know we're about to hit time, so I wish that we could answer more questions because I know that the discussion is so rich. And I'm just going to ask Leanne to put up that final slide that has our contact information for all the organizations. And yeah, I just want to thank everyone again for sharing all of this knowledge and joining us. And a reminder that we are recording this. We will share it out probably by the beginning of next week at the very latest, because it will take some time to look through the chat record and collect everything because there's actually so much there, right? And we'll get slides from our presenters who want to share them, and I'll just try to collect everything I can and get that to you so you can watch and revisit and hopefully join us and continue fighting for a free Palestine.